King County Fire District 27 to order. As usual, we'll start with our public comment period. Just as a reminder, or for any of those of you who may not have been here before, we allow 3 minutes per person. You can't give that time to someone else. We ask that you keep your comments professional and for the good of the order. And if you didn't see the list over here, you can put your name down, or we can call on you at the end if somebody missed the list. Are we on there? Oh, I'm not.
Dan, did you say you could not give any leftover time to someone else?
No.
No.
We've not been allowing that.
Oh.
Yes, you get your 3 minutes if you want to use them all.
Yeah.
That's great. First up, we have Dave Hart.
Good evening. I'm hoping tonight that we hear some real positive things about where we're at in the budget and stuff. I'd like to make a couple comments on, I'm glad to see we're getting close to the 24/7. It looks like we're getting there, the one I'm seeing here. But we can't live on overtime doing that. We really need to hire that 12 firefighter next year sometime. I think we really need to do that because it's just too hard to live on overtime to make it work. A couple other things that have kind of crossed my mind a little bit when it comes to capital equipment is I really don't believe we need a new tender. I think there's other options that we can do for that tender to make things work. And I know probably the chief's got some different ideas on that. And as far as that new 8 car, I'd like to see us back that up for a couple years. The backup 8 car is in good shape. It's not costing us much in maintenance. So we can get by for a couple years and maybe divert that money to a couple of the needs that we really need right now, which is SCBA's and the bunker gear. And put that 8 car back a couple years and we could save the money and do it then. Because we were already over on the 8 car a little bit. I think we could get by for a little while longer. Just a couple thoughts. That's it.
Good, thank you. George Robertson.
Good evening. So what I want to talk about here is I'm speaking for our committee, Save Fall City Fire. District 10, our Eastside Fire and Rescue, at their commissioners meeting on the 11th, drafted what we're referring to as a ridiculous document. And it has all kind of bogus information in it. We have answered that, but it's too long to read. You guys have got it on your email. Melinda's got it on, I just gave it to her. So that's all I got. I want to make sure this gets into the record.
We did receive that today.
That's it.
Thank you. Noel Eby.
That would be me. Thank you. Further information or question on what Mr. Hart said about the tender. It was brought to my attention here quite recently that a new tender costs what, like $1 million? It's a lot of money, right? And that the way that Duval is taking care of that is they're redoing the one that they've got at an 80% savings. Also, in the talk about a new aid car, the city of Bellevue now is redoing theirs. All they're doing with an aid car is putting a new chassis under it. And here again, it's a large dollar savings for the district. I would like to have those considered. Thank you.
Thank you. Nora Hightower.
Good evening. At your July 8th meeting, I had suggested creating a committee to help develop your budget with membership of the commissioner, chief, firefighters, and citizens. And that committee could have leveraged the expertise in our department as well as the community. And I also suggested using a template to more systematically evaluate options for the major budget items that you're being considered. And I had thought, when you talked about the agenda for tonight at that last meeting, that the committee proposal was to be discussed tonight, but I don't see it on the agenda, so I'm curious if it is to be discussed at all or not.
Is that it? Good, thank you. Carrie Lee Gagnon?
Good day, Board of Commissioners. We, back here, are the faces of the community that have been referred to throughout the campaign. A diverse cross-section of those who participated in the vote, yes, no, and undecided. Today, we are better educated and more informed, and as a result, are not satisfied with how things have been handled since last November. When we voted, there was an uncertainty regarding the information presented, which diminished our ability to sort fact from fiction. This uncertainty unquestionably contributed to the results of April's vote, and we want a chance to vote again. This time we will be able to cast our votes with confidence in the truth surrounding this issue. Either vote, yes or no, had a unifying goal, to do right by our firefighters. When we voted, we believed that the decision made by the board would be in the best interest of the community. But given the direction that the latest meetings have gone, that is not the case. This is not due to the inaction of the board. It is a result of trying to preserve the past instead of meeting the challenges of today and looking forward. While we appreciate our heritage and value our fire station's history, Fall City is changing, along with the cost of living and our expectations of our fire service. We are not satisfied with paying more for less, which is what the proposed M&O levy will do. When our neighbors in Sammamish, Issaquah, Carnation, Preston, and North Bend are paying less for better service, why are we being asked to pay more and receive less? We talk about hiring another firefighter, but with what incentives? We have a slow growth tax base, unstable funding, and lack of training opportunities, with little opportunity for promotion. We talk about agreements between fire districts. Why would we rely on another department's ability and willingness to respond when we have the opportunity to be fully staffed at all times? We want to have the best responders available, well-rested, well-staffed, well-equipped, and dedicated. To serving Fall City. Our over-reliance on other districts has been well documented, and those districts have taken notice. When given the opportunity to step up, Fall City decided instead to cut back and choose to do so based on our neighboring district's willingness to answer. Sorry, I'm using technology today. To answer that call. That is a method based on hope, not real solutions, and one that will surely wear out our welcome with our neighbors. We cannot continue simply kicking the can down a road that will eventually end with the same result, the need to change how we do business long term. We are here to ask the board 3 things: to provide us the opportunity to reassess the information in an unbiased format and get the merger back on the ballot, to deny any ad hoc committees the ability to manage the budget or interview for new staff. We elected you in good faith to perform those duties. To keep in the forefront that we want the best for our firefighters with minimal impact to our taxes, as this is what was promised to us and has yet to be delivered. Thank you.
Thank you. Was there anybody else who was on the list? No? All right. We will move on. So first on our agenda is hiring an additional firefighter, or I think as we discussed last time, actually the objective of 3 personal staffing. And the chief has an item under new business, a draft letter of agreement under our current collective bargaining agreement. And I would suggest that we just defer this discussion until that item. Put those two things together. Is that okay to you, Lily?
Yes, okay, thanks.
Yeah, okay. And so, financial projections. The chief has some additional ideas, some additional changes that he would like to talk about, and I think we'll be able to hit on a few of the questions we've heard and some of the things we've been debating and talking about over the last few months. So, go ahead, Chief.
Sure. Thank you. And I have prepared a couple of different documents that I'm going to be referring to, and then there's some others that folks may have in front of them. The one that I'm looking at, and I'm gonna start on, it says across the top, it says budget forecast discussion. And then maybe even on the back side of that page, it says amendment suggestions. So I have it on two different pages, but you may have it on the single page. So what I wanted to do was to go through some of this, and some of it runs together. Because like hiring an additional person versus doing some kind of a work schedule, work cycle change, is related. Everything here is related. So anyways, I'll go through this and then hopefully answer any questions that you guys have so that you know. I know we've discussed this before, so I think you guys have a little bit of an idea on some of this, as well as you've had the proposed LOA to look at. So, and then for the audience's benefit, the employees here are covered by a collective bargaining agreement, and uniform, police, and fire, they have, in this state, binding arbitration. So, if you employ uniform firefighters, you bargain with them, and our unit has filed, and for many years, we have bargained with them. But there are certain things that we can and can't do, and things that are bargainable. So just keep that in mind as we move through here, because if you have an idea that, well, why don't we just do this or whatever, remember that many of those things we have to touch and talk with labor about first, because the employer can't make any unilateral changes. So we have a collective bargaining agreement, and we have to stay in our lanes. And that's where we want to be anyways. We want to be fair and upright with our people. So one of the things that we've had some discussion with labor on is a short-term addition of a schedule that's not currently in our collective bargaining agreement. And what is different from this schedule is the 24-hour schedules that we have that are inherent in our document. They have a 27-day work cycle. The proposal is a shorter work cycle. And so basically what we found is that if we were to take, we've done quite a bit of studies looking at the schedule for this current year. And what we found is that if we had two people that were working the 6 in 19-day work cycles, and if we were intelligent about how we plugged them into the schedule, that we would be able to cover a lot of the vacancies by doing that in that 19-day period. And we have an accounting of, well, which work cycles would we actually have to take overtime to have increased staffing. And what we're talking about is with career people that we would have 3 folks on duty. And then there's many of the work periods where we actually have a surplus, so we'll be able to cover all of the vacancies that currently exist. And we've looked at it many different ways. We've looked at the first half of the year, the back half of the year, and we've come up with and derived some numbers. And obviously, any time that you move from the current situation that we have is that we are covering, we have 3-person staffing during the day, 99.9% of the time. At night, we also have 3-person staffing, but sometimes we use volunteers to do that. If you're moving to the point where you're going to use career folks to provide that coverage, there's an increased cost to do that. So the cost that we have, that we show on the top line there, the $50,000 is basically, and if you look at it, just so that you know, full disclosure here, in my best calculations and taking the best guess on what it would take to do that for half of the year, it turned out to be like $48,900 and some dollars. And then again, that looks at a 6-month period, and even if we executed this today, we know that we're almost a month down, and it'll be weeks before we would actually have a change. So not months, but actually weeks. So we would be looking at a smaller amount. So But we already are behind on our overtime budget. And if you look through last month, we were at 55,444, so we were already about $5,400 overspent on that. So that's what that line item is all about, and again, it is a short-term thing. The LOA runs with the collective bargaining agreement. And just so that everyone knows, the cycle that we're on, our collective bargaining agreement expired December 31st of last year. And what we did is we did a one-year extension that gets us through the end of this year. And then between now and the end of the year, we have to bargain a new 3-year agreement. So, and some of those things, we'll get to that in a minute, but once we know what those labor costs are, we can get them loaded a little bit more accurately, then we'll be able to do that, so.
So just
so
to, if I
anyways,
could, Chief, just
Sure.
to reiterate, what this line item is using planned overtime versus, emergent overtime, if you will. So the overtime that has occurred so far this year to cover vacancies has been about 55,000. We would likely expect it to be similar for the second half of the year. If we change the work schedule and we actually plug those overtime hours into known vacancies, we can achieve a better level of staffing than we have in the first half of the year with career firefighters.
that is correct, because it's a little bit more efficient, and then you would leverage the dollars that we're hiring somebody back to cover the shift at night. We would leverage those dollars directly into covering other shifts, because these people would be working 24-hour shifts, not just 12 hours. So the coverage model would change.
So this gains certainty in our schedule. It also improves the schedule for those two newest individuals from their current schedule to this proposed schedule. So it doesn't put them on the exact same schedule as everyone else. But
They
it's
would
a
have
better.
a unique 19-day schedule that would be unique to the two employees that are assigned to it. And their terms of employment, some of them would be the same, but as far as like Kelly days, they wouldn't receive any Kelly days for that shortened work period. This will affect the number of hours that they work. Currently, the day shift schedule, they are scheduled to work an average of about 42 hours per week. And by putting them on the schedule, we can get a lot closer to like 53 a week. So, on average, so you can see right there, there's more hours of coverage that we
Next time
would buy.
Okay.
So we were at roughly 55,000 at the last,
For the first half
for
of
the
the year.
first half of the year.
Correct.
And then, so you're anticipating roughly that for the second half of the year. So this $50,000 that's shaded in on
Yes.
the budget forecast is then, it's overtime cost that we're anticipating we're gonna have one way or the other.
For the second half of the year, correct.
Okay, and so the difference between if we don't make the change and we do adopt this is how much?
The change in what the overtime is?
Dollar, end of year.
Oh, so what we'll be asking for in the budget amendment is currently the budget line item for overtime is 50,000, and we would be adding 50, so it's an increase of 50 to go to 100,000. Is that what you're, that didn't answer your question?
No, so at the end of the year, what we ultimately spend on overtime, if we just continue down the same path we're on right now versus the letter of agreement.
Well, I'm not sure we have a reliable way to estimate it because we didn't.
Projected.
Yeah, so to me, the best projection would be to look at the last 6 months.
Okay, so the
All
dollar
conditions
amount's
being-
gonna be the same,
gonna be
but we're gonna
similar.
fill more holes there. But we're currently at 99.9%.
Well, when I
Sorry,
say
the-
99.9, I did not do the math on that. I mean, certainly we could, and we can track that when what I'm telling you is that even now, in the model that we have, and then moving forward, we will not be at 100% because in order to be at 100%, you have to have the ability to mandatory somebody in for overtime. So
We don't currently
if
have
we
that.
voluntarily get folks to fill the shifts, the vacancies that we have, we should be. But, you know, I think we had a couple of shifts last year where we made a good faith attempt to hire somebody, but they were, because of the notice that they had and other reasons, you know, at least one of these happened like right near Christmas. We were unable to get anyone internally. Then when we went out to our shared staffing partners to see if they had someone available, they didn't do it either, so, and we only had the ability to mandatory to 2, so, and for those, you know, there were a couple of 12-hour shifts that we only had 2 folks here.
So we had a couple 12-hour shifts.
Last, yes, and that was in 18 of 19.
Okay.
So thus far this year, we've been pretty successful with the 3-person staffing with the combination.
Okay, and I'm presumably supporting this, but I'm still trying to wrap around, we're at 99.9%
During the day.
during the day. And the 2 shifts that were not 3-person shifts last year were, that was at night, 12 hours was at night.
There were 2 of them there, and, you know, looking back at the whole year, you know, but there may have been another one, but I would have to look back and look at it, but there were a couple of the night half of the shift where we were not able to fill. I believe that one on Christmas though was the daytime portion. So, but I would need to look back, be very specific to your question there to make sure you have exactly the right answer. So this will get you very, very close. So, and hopefully if we're successful, which I'm hoping that we will be, it's,
So 99.9% though is pretty darn close. And so that 1/10 of the 1/10% is, are those 2 or 3 12-hour shifts? That's where
that would drop that down. And so the actual number, you know, we would need to calculate that. And then there is a caveat on this too, and it's found right in, because you have the collective bargaining agreement right in front of you. If for some reason we don't have 11 people, so for instance, we have a disability or something, we have somebody that's not able to work, we're gonna probably go back to a different work shift. And that amount is, you know, we're gonna have to roll back to something that we're doing closer to what we're doing now, because we just won't have the, we just won't have the people to do that.
And the impact of overtime maybe great. Do that.
Exactly. So if you chose that, well, let's just do this anyways, the overtime impact would be greater to the point where you might want to consider different options.
Chris, can I ask a question? So the 99% that you're talking about, is that with the volunteer aspect from last year? Or is it strictly career staffing? So that might be the disconnect.
Yeah, the 99 that Chris said earlier, that was referring to the ditch.
She was referring to the percentage of the time that we had 3 people on staff, combination of career and volunteer. Whereas what we're talking about now is the coverage with the career goes up to that level and higher.
With the proposal?
Right.
Okay.
But make no mistake, making that leap up there, that it does cost dollars. And then again, this LOA is a short-term fix, and it lives with the agreement that we're under right now. So it's good until the end of the year. Then we have to bargain, you know, what the next situation will be.
Okay, so if we do this, then we would have the 99.9% or 100% 24/7 between now and the end of the year, regardless of what happens with volunteers.
And I can tell you that we will offer it 100% of the time.
Right.
Whether or not it gets filled 100% of the time, I have less control over. And if we're not able to internally fill it, we will also reach out to our shared staffing partners too, and give them an opportunity as well. As far as what that ultimate number will be, I don't have any control over that.
But you would have the benefit of further lead time, in most cases.
Perhaps, but if we're using the person to cover so that we have 3 careers here 24/7, if somebody calls in sick, then
You're back to the
I
same
have,
situation.
I have the same lead time that I would have. So, just full disclosure, so that we're talking about the same thing.
Would you be trying to get back to 3 instead of 2?
And a larger labor pool would allow us to do that, but it's not in the cards, as
Right.
you'll see later, that it's not in the cards to have a huge labor pool here, so. Any other question about the 6 and 19 for now? And then as we look
And
at
we'll
the
get into that again
LOA,
later.
consider that, and
Yeah.
if there's any other questions that come up, we can get those answered. So
We
next.
decide to go with the LOA, how soon could we implement it?
Weeks.
Okay.
So weeks, not months. So, the collective bargaining agreement, once I have something that I can go with, I'm required by the collective bargaining agreement to give 2 weeks notice minimum to any long-term schedule change. So if we're gonna change somebody to that, then we would be looking at weeks, so a couple weeks.
So let me go back to my question. So either way we go, we're basically gonna spend the same amount of money. This is gonna drive up the, just making sure that we're covered with career firefighters.
It's gonna get a lot better.
It's gonna get a lot better.
It's gonna get a lot better.
That's gonna improve the schedule for the 2 that are on 12s.
Any other questions for right now, or can we move on to the next item? So the next item is the trailer modification that I've already mentioned before. And what we're doing with that is that we're adding a rack on top of our existing trailer and a second deck, so to speak. So the boat that's on there now with the motor, which is pretty heavy, it could be loaded or unloaded independently of what's on the second deck. And then on the second deck, we would have a couple of our other boats that would sit up there, so, and you could do one without having to unload the other and to make what it is, so. And then this now will come out of the existing capital equipment budget for this year. So the budget impact for 2019 is neutral, so, that line item. Any questions about that before we move on? Okay, so moving on to the PPE ensemble, then what we're talking about here is a full set of bunker gear, so both coat and pants, hood, gloves, and helmet. So an entire ensemble for each person. And the cost for that, we had a quote that was a little over $3,000 per person. And then, so this would outfit the number of firefighters that we have now, and also would allow us to purchase 4 spare sets of gear that the volunteers could use when their gear is either sent out for repairs, or if they come back from a fire and have the same problem that our career firefighters would have, then that's what would happen. And again, doing that this year would have a budget impact for 2019. We'll get back to that in a moment here.
And that, this 49,500, that includes helmets and boots.
It does. It does.
And if those 2 items were subtracted out, what does it do to that price?
I think the, and I don't think I have that quote in front of me, but I can get it and get my fingers on it pretty
adequately, but I think that the boots are gonna be a little less than $200, and I think the helmet is gonna be somewhere in that neighborhood too, so $200 or $250 or something per person. And then the other thing that that you commissioners need to know too is that with the PPE ensemble that we're purchasing and that we have here, there was some discussion, suggestion that came from somebody that, well, we could have gear that exceeds a 10-year life. And when I looked into that, the requirement for replacing the entire ensemble at 10 years is an NFPA recommendation and not something that we're required to do by state law. So the state law says that you're gonna take care of the equipment in accordance with the manufacturer's recommendations. And so that 10-year life is something that comes from NFPA, not from the manufacturer. So we would initially buy this, then our procedure moving forward is that we're not necessarily gonna buy the same amount of gear every 5 years. And there's some attrition and horse training, I guess, so to speak, that occurs here. So currently, right now, if we have a new set of recruits that are coming through, unless they're sized so that we have to, what normally happens is that we find a career person that's about the same size and maybe wears the same gear. The career person would get the new gear, and then they would hand down the old gear to the volunteers. And we've been doing that for decades. So, and that will continue. And then the ultimate life of the gear may, in some cases, exceed 10 years. So, just so that you know.
So to go back, this was how many sets?
11 and 4. So 15 sets. Any other questions on that? Moving down, the next item that I have there is power load for 7904. 7904 is an apparatus number which refers to our existing front of aid car. And currently it has a power cot in it, but it does not have a power load. So, and the power cot raises the cot and lowers it with battery powered electrically. And it helps to save some backs. The power load actually takes it one step further, and it actually loads the cot into the aid car automatically. So that's what that device does. And we will come to this in just a few minutes because we're going to talk about the aid car purchase. And one of the things that you're going to hear from me is I'm going to tell you that we're going to do that my recommendation is to delay the aid car purchase. And by doing that, then it makes it more important that we get the power load in the front of aid car. The new aid car, if we were buying that, we would have included both the power cot and the power load in that. So, and then that includes the cost of the power load and then the installation in there. So we should be able to get it done for, and I think it turned out to be like $25,900, very, very close to 26,000. So, any questions about that? So the next item, and when we actually look at some of the projections, some of this will become, and right now we're discussing it, then we'll look at the projections and then people can see for themselves. But as I mentioned before, a collective bargaining agreement expires at the end of the year. So the cost of labor to a finite amount, we do not know until after we have done that for the next 3-year period. So there are some placeholders in there and stuff, but we, some of this will be a little bit more known, and some of the conditions that will be a little bit more known after we complete that process. And then the forecast that you will see, the 12th firefighter is included in the budget forecast that we're going to look at tonight in just a few minutes. And I'm not saying that it needs to stay there. What I'm saying is that it is included, and and that cost is $101,285, which is the 75% level, and it begins on January 1st of 20. So that you'll see that when we get to the model and look at it. The next piece, and then the due date off to the right, these ones that talk about 20 and 21 and some of that other stuff, obviously those are not affecting the budget for 2019. Things that we need to know about definitively tonight. Some of this other stuff will be better known when, as we work toward the budget for next year, which we'll be starting on. And boy, August is, next week, so it's like no rest for the wicked, and be right into the budget before you know it, so. So the firefighter is in January 1st of 20. The MDCs now, this is replacement of the computers that are in there. We have 2 vehicles that are equipped with those now, the front up A-car and the front up engine. And the modem component is at end of life, and the computers are just beyond useful life. So, and again, that date that's on there, 12/31 of 2020, we will not have any support or ability to repair after that date. So they said they don't want to answer any questions, they don't want to, they're not accepting the repair, and they're not making any patches any longer. That's what's driving that. The good news is there that 20K, I'm thinking that depending on exactly how we do this and what decisions we make, we may be able to do it a little cheaper than that. But for right now, that's the estimate that what we have that's put in there. The aid card purchase, it was shown on the last budget that we looked at. And
SCBA.
oh, did I skip over? Oh, it sure did. So the SCBA purchase, again, these are at end of life November of 2021, so that's where we are. We can't buy those in November and replace them in November because there's a training component that needs to occur before we put them online. So ideally, we would be looking at those probably like 90 days ahead of that is the timing wise of where we should put it. However, on the budget, I think that Melinda may have actually put it in November, but we may have to shift that up. And part of what we're going to be looking at tonight too is some of the cash flow. And when something moves forward by 3 months, it has a material effect on the cash flow. So we will want to get this right so that we know, especially when you see the same numbers that we've been looking at here. So, and again, the SCBA purchase, I had come up and provided you with an estimate. The number of SCBA's that we're talking about is 14 there. I've heard the suggestion that, well, you guys just need to get by with less, because we'll never have 14 people that are in SCBA simultaneously. And again, the only thing that I would tell the board about that is that we will need to equip our engine. So, and we have a component, and we also on the tender. So the way that we deploy them, we have 5 on the engine, we have 2 that are on the tender. So we have those 7, and then the other 7 packs are the 14. So that's where they are. Some of them are on the reserve engine. Presumably, if we were going off to do some training, they would be taking that vehicle, so 5 of those SCBA's would go with it. If it's a MCO, like we've been doing up at North Bend the last few years with Duval and Snoqualmie, we have been using most of our packs. Anyways, we have had a couple of discussions at our officers meeting, and at this point, we would like to keep the estimate of 14 in the budget. If you come back and you say, well, you're gonna have to figure out how you can get by with 12, and that's the very lowest number that we might be able to get with. But there will be some impact, and we'll have to do some.
In this 185 number was based on joining up with Shoreline or whoever had the PO that was open.
That bid, and we knew right from the get-go that it expired in 12/31/18. And what I was told is that the manufacturer was honoring that bid. But when I talked to the folks that would actually take the order, they're not honoring that bid. So the price that you actually can buy those units at has increased from what the original estimate was. And then it looks like the containment system might be a little bit cheaper, but I still think that, and then we did get another independent bid, and it started with a 2, so there were 14 air packs and everything that we needed. And there were some things that were included in there that need to come off of that bid, but, you know, the bid with everything that you could buy, 14 of them, and then the air packs that we need, so it was like 240 or something like that, so. I don't think that the 185 is a terrible estimate. Sorry for skipping over that, and then moving on to the ACAR, and as I stated before, what I'm gonna be recommending tonight is that we just delay the ACAR purchase. And it shows in here that that the delay is until the end of 2021. In looking at some of the financial projections, and then you may draw some of the same conclusions when you look at it tonight in a few minutes. But that delay may be beyond 2021. So somehow we're gonna have to make some adjustments to make things happen. So then moving down below the line there, and why are they not included in the same thing? Why is there a break? I don't know, but there's one item when we get to it here, which the Board of Commissioners has not heard about at all, so, but I'm introducing it to you tonight. Certainly you've heard about the heavy rescue tools and the $38,000. That is not shown in any of our projections, so just so that you're aware, that's not in the projections at all at any place. And then the next item there is body armor. So what we're talking about with body armor, these are bulletproof vests and a tactical helmet, so a Kevlar helmet. And that is six sets. So 3 on the ACAR, 3 on the engine is how the deployment might fit if we even can figure out a way to do that. And again, that is not in any of the projections that you're going to see tonight as well. So then moving down, and some of this has got kind of doubled up, so when we look at the projections, I'll be very, very clear so that you can see exactly how it's been put in here. But some of the stuff, for instance, the nozzles and the hose, has been included on a single line. So it says, well, why does it say 10,000? It's because nozzles and hose, 5,000, and both areas adds to 10,000. And then the TRT hardware, we talked about that before, that's replacement of all the hard and soft goods that we have for the technical rescue. And then the last item was a chainsaw, which is fairly inexpensive, and then a K-12 saw, which we do not currently own. So, and some of these things come from requests from me when we go through our process about, well, what kind of items would we like to see in the future, or what we need to do. So, and then a couple of things just as reminders that I've included on this same discussion sheet so that reminder to the board here. We had a meeting last week of the Joint Ops Board over at NORCOM, and we pushed the budget forward, so it'll be going up to the governing board, and then in August we'll actually decide on that, and we'll know what our user fee is going to be. But based on what was pushed up there and what we know about the future of, you know, the NORCOM budget, in 2021, the 911 program office is reducing the funding that goes to NORCOM by $280,000. And our share of that is pretty small, and this is just a little blip on the radar that probably don't even need to worry you guys about. However, in 2023, the loss, in addition to the 280, there's an additional 1.8 billion. And that's something that we need to probably plan for, because it's a much bigger blip on the radar screen. And then, as you will see tonight, when we look at the forecast, and the discussions that we've had over the past month or so, that we probably need to look at our vehicle replacement fund. And obviously, if you're gonna take my recommendation and you're gonna not buy the 8-car, then that'll materially affect at least that portion of it. And there may be some other things that we could take a hard look at everything. And then just some other little things for us to keep in the back of our mind. We do not have an equipment replacement fund, and by not having that, some of the things, like for instance our 800 megahertz radios, the 800 megahertz radios, with the exception of 3 of those, where we had to actually go out and we bought some surplus units from Bellevue to keep ourselves alive, but we're using the radios that were issued to us when the project was initially funded many years ago. And to my knowledge, there's no other department that actually is still using that generation of radios. So we didn't have an equipment replacement fund, and we've been lucky and we've taken good care of them. But when one of those things goes haywire, we don't know if we'll get it back or not. So, and the mobiles have held up pretty good too. So just an example of the need for a replacement fund, and there's no funding that's included in there. Facilities replacement too. Our station was redone in 2004, so we're at the 15-year mark now, and we'll have some things. And there's some areas, if you look at the carpet, a couple of places where the carpet's pretty bulged up and probably should have already been replaced, but we're rolling around on it anyways. So, but at some point, we'll have to take care of some of that stuff too. We have done some painting, and we have done some stuff to take care of our station, but some of this stuff is bigger stuff. And I heard someone say, oh, well, they got a new roof that they need to do. There's nothing wrong with our roof. Our roof is fine. So I don't know where that rumor came from, but the roof is in pretty good shape, but it needs some moss treatment. Periodically, you have to do that a couple times a year, but that's only a couple $100. So, and the life of the roof is well within what its rated life was. I think we have a 35-year roof on there, so we should be fine with that for a while. And then new employees, just a reminder that having somebody dedicated in training versus having somebody that's not dedicated to training, that's working shift, is a different thing. And then administrative help in some form, and whether that's a deputy chief or it's another admin assistant or both. I think if you look around at departments that are our size, that have grown so that they have the number of FTEs, I think you may be hard pressed to find somebody that's operating at the level that we are. And that's going to be a pressure that you're probably going to feel in the next levy cycle, that we're going to have to do something to address that. And right now, we just have a lot of stuff that just doesn't happen because we don't have the bandwidth for it. So, but to be safe and efficient and all that stuff, we need to have the bandwidth. So, and then in a moment here, we'll look at the budget forecast there, but on the back side of that page, or maybe on a separate page, there were a couple of amendment suggestions that I want to go through, and then we'll look at the forecast. So the pieces to the budget, to do the 6 shifts in 19 days, is an increase of $50K to the budget. Then under capital equipment on line 55, the hose, the nozzle, the TRT equipment, and the K-12 and the chainsaw, which are 5,000, 5,000, 8,000, and 1,500 respectively, add up to 19,500 on that line. And then just below that is the power load with the installation, which is the $26,000. And then on line 56, the protective clothing, which is the 11 plus 4 cents that we talked about. And the budgeted amount is 3,300 per set. Any questions about that piece of it? And then maybe we can take a look at the forecast and then
Sure.
what I would like to do is to get some action or not action, so that I know what is it exactly that you want me to come back with. So what I had heard from the commissioners pretty much individually was, it would be helpful if I would put something together and then bring it back and some kind of a recommendation to the board. And that's what I've attempted to do here. And, it kind of kicks the can down the road a little bit, but, it keeps us surviving for another couple of years, and then we'll know what happens with the next levy cycle or whatever happens. We'll have a little bit more clarity to what that might be.
So just to recap, so from this list, the items that are shaded are the ones that you are recommending we move forward on now.
And that have a 2019 budget impact, yes.
And those you have added to the projection, which we're gonna look at in a minute. One item that I think was on our list previously is in the projection. The amount is not included though.
The training?
The training
Okay.
item. I think that probably should be on this list as well, but.
And so brand new numbers, and I hate to bring forth brand new numbers, but let's talk about that training because it's gonna show up on our other sheet here in a minute.
Yep.
So, and again, remember now with training that if we're doing something different, there's a labor component here, and labor gets to weigh in on those things. So the employer cannot unilaterally just make whatever changes we want without consulting with labor. And that process is beginning, but what I'm after is this even something that we're gonna propose? Because if we don't have the money to do it, then like I can make all kinds of plans and stuff, but if you guys aren't gonna fund it, it's not gonna go very far.
So if we join the training consortium, labor would have to include
There are some labor implications in there, and so you'll have to negotiate the impacts. So, and impacts it. So it is a discussion that we need to get them into quickly, and then at what point does this get resolved? Probably along with the negotiation of the agreement is probably where it gets addressed and settled. So the number that you're gonna see on that, because I skipped over it, and maybe it should have been on one of these sheets. But the number that we had been provided for the number of employees that we have was right around $50,000. And then in addition to that, for the block coverage, we have to provide our own coverage for block training. And some of this block training is gonna occur down in Kent. So that's an hour away from here. And then our crews would travel down there, they would have a 4-hour block of training, and then they would need to travel back. So there's 6 hours basically of coverage, and we need to do that with several different people. So, because we'd be needing to look at 3 of them. And then I noticed, and have not had a chance to correct, but the number that I have plugged in there, and that you're gonna see tonight, only provides coverage one person, so we're gonna need to triple that coverage number, so the amount that's above 50K, and we're gonna have to triple that because we need 3 people to cover, not just one. So, I lost you there, didn't I?
Yeah.
Okay, let me start over. So, one component is that if you move to the training consortium, that you get the ability to use their content. And then in addition to that, there's a eLogix learning management program that you buy into. the cost for that is pretty minimal, but we would have to bear that cost ourselves to have access to that system. So then, when you send the career companies out for their block training, we need to have coverage. So we still need another crew here, and presumably, we would do that with 3 people here. And so, the travel time, it's an hour down, an hour back, plus a 4-hour block. So each one of those trainings is a 6-hour block, times 3, which would be 18 hours for each of the block coverages. And then if you're tracking and you wanna know, well, what's the right number on the block coverage, there's 4 of those that are offered per year, per shift. So there's a dozen of them that we're covering. And if you do, and so saw the error of my ways here, and it was too late for me to do anything about it. But I did not include enough overtime. But again, that's in the 2020 budget, not the 19 budget. So in the forecast, it's wrong. So, and it's gonna put some pressure on that number upwards. So, and some of these costs, as we move through to the 20 budget too, we'll have a little bit more time to revisit some of these things as well.
So on your recommendation to defer the 8-car purchase,
Yes.
do you also have a recommendation on whether or not we change our planned reserve transfers and or use of current equipment reserve dollars?
Yes, I do. And so when we look at the projections, what we had done the last iteration there, we got some direction, I think it may have came from you directly, that we knew that the car was costing more than what we had originally included in the vehicle replacement fund. And we wanted to catch those dollars up, and the way to do that was, instead of an $80,000 contribution this year and next, that we would increase that to $120,000. And in the financial model that you see tonight, and we'll go through all of these things so you can see them on the model. What we've done is we've spun that back to 80K. So for this year, an 80K.
Any recommendation beyond that?
I think that when you look at the numbers, that what we may be looking at is a completely different way to fund our vehicle replacement in the future. So it needs some kind of a wholesale change, or something has to structurally happen, because we need to make sure that, and some of the numbers are fairly big when we look at the cash flow, and we can't run out of cash, obviously. So I think we're probably at the point where we need to look at some of the projections, and then we can go through that, and then maybe talk about that. However, I don't think that's something that needs to be decided tonight. It's something that we can further work on in the 20 budget, but most certainly, that needs to, in the next levy planning period, is imperative that we have some kind of solution for, and, we just need more revenue is what we need.
So, is it fair to say the recommendation to delay this vehicle is likely going to lead to the recommendation of delaying other vehicles? Like everything else, we're going to likely push everything forward.
I think that that may be exactly what it means, is that we need to revisit that schedule, and even to the point where the money that we've already sequestered, or we will have sequestered by the end of the year, that, we're kind of kicking the can down the road here, but come, the second or third year of that levy cycle, you may need those dollars, and if you've already spent them, then you're not gonna have them to fund the personnel, the training, and, some of the other things that we just talked about that are probably a higher priority, the SCBA's. It's not really an optional thing, so, the optional part is, well, maybe we can shave a few dollars here, or shave a few dollars there, but the bottom line is that, we're gonna have to do something to address that. If you'd like, I can take a look at some other options there, but at this point, from a safety standpoint, we'd like to have our people in Vegas, market or something like that, then what you're investing in is not going to be the 15-year fund.
Sure.
So,
Okay.
I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, it does, absolutely. Any other questions, Eric or Lily, at this point?
Chief, if we were to join the training consortium, would we still need to employ a training officer to oversee that?
Well, right now, we have a person that's on shift that is our training coordinator. And-
Correct.
And again, that position is not gonna go away. But if you're asking, well, does that mean that we perhaps wouldn't need a dedicated person in training? Or that maybe it's less than an FTE? I would say that, maybe that's the case, that it's less than an FTE, but we probably, even though you're buying into the consortium, the bottom line is they don't do our training for us. So they provide us with a lot of resources, and they provide us with content that we can use. But make no mistake, a lot of the training is we're going to be doing it, and the delivery of the training to our volunteers, we're almost at, we're close to 100%, except for they would have some block training too that's available, which would be done in different format, but on the weekend where they would do some block training for volunteers, it'd be on a weekend, and then we would send them down there and they would participate. So they would come equipped. And so there's a cost to that too, in that we also would need to send a pump operator down there, which currently we don't have any volunteers that are pump operators, so, but it's lesser level than sending an entire crew down there. Did that answer your question, Lily?
Yes, it sounds like we need to discuss this further before we make a decision.
Sorry,
Yeah, we will have to discuss that further before we would move forward on joining that group.
Correct.
Yeah,
Although I would like some indication here that we're gonna move in that direction, because we're planning on having, some meetings which would involve labor and some others to actually, have that gentleman come up here to provide a presentation and stuff, and then if there's no interest in doing this, you guys should just tell me that right now, and I'll shut it right down, and we'll figure out.
well, I certainly have interest in pursuing it. I think it's still a better option for us.
I do too, and I think you told us that Snohomish had just joined up with this, and that you were
July
gonna
1st.
get some feedback as the year progressed from them as to how either their department or the chief felt it was working out for them. And, so I'd be interested in that feedback.
Well, I think the Snoqualmie is just an additional piece, but there's already plenty of feedback that is readily available to us, because they've been in business now for 7 years, so, this is not something that's brand new. The folks north of I-90 becoming part of their consortium is still part of this.
Well, I think, we should continue to investigate and get the pertinent information that's gonna apply to us, so we can fully understand it. But I think, what point Lily's trying to make is we can't, in the mix of everything else that we're gonna look at here in a minute when we finally turn the lights off, I think, it's not something we can just easily do, because we have to start making some choices.
And again, what I was asked to do by some of you individually is put together something that
Right.
shows us a little survival plan so that we can do as many things as we can, and let's see if we can address the sampling and the bunker gear, some of these other items, which, tried to put that together for you. So,
Right.
and then we've loaded that into our model now, and then we can look at the model and the projections of it. I can't really do the projections.
Can you get that?
And again, what we were asked to do with the model, and I believe that there's another sheet that everyone has in front of them that says draft budget projections.
And what that looks at is, it takes the these are the entire year, so it goes January through December. But anything that populates in this, the annual amount then shows up on this other sheet. So that's how the model is put together. This is a pretty darn complex model and stuff here too. But anyways, we have the ability to look at stuff from, you know, on an individual and on a monthly basis. And this makes a lot of sense to us because this is the way that you actually do the annual budget, and then the other things just are rolled up like that. So, again, we try to do this in such a fashion that, and I don't have my titles froze correctly there we go. So we have, the line items, we tried to maintain some integrity so that they line up with what our existing budget is. And then what we were asked to do was, we'll go down to the bottom of the budget and then add some new line items that actually start to plug in some of the other items here. So, and again, this is a work in progress that we've been working on for a while, and we will continue to work on it to refine it. But, you know, like I told you, not every single one, not 100% of these things are even loaded into the budget right now. But here's a great example. Here's your PPE, and this is showing that that $49,500 was represented at 15 cents, and that's where that expense lies. And then before the end of the year, here's your 5 and 5 for the hose and nozzles, and then there's the 8 for the SRT and hardware, and the 1,500. Then there's the power load, so you can see the things that affect the budget more immediately are included in here. And then there's the 80,000 that we reduced down. So the last time that we looked at that number was 120,000. So we reduced that down not only in this year, but in 2020 as well. So Melinda, before I go on, because you're not driving, what else am I missing on there before I look at the next?
The overtime.
Okay, yeah.
I just have that up at the top.
So the overtime piece, if we roll up to that, so, and interestingly enough, this line 18, some of these overtime things had a purpose at one point, and the purpose is gone, and what we need to do, and we discussed this today, and it's like, well, when do we want to revamp the budget and change the line items? And my answer to that is, well, that would be next year, not this year. So we're gonna live with this and leave it there. But the 50K is what was budgeted, and then the add is the 50K. So those were the items, the immediate items that we talked about tonight. Okay. So that's kind of what it looks like. And then if you get down to and you look at the bottom, it starts to show you the cash balance, and then where we think the petty cash will be, and this all every month we fit this perfectly. So when we did such a fund, replenishing that fund. The 559 is our operational reserve. And then this capital equipment, you can see that once we make that 80K, because we moved the in-car expense out, which was, I think it lived in November of this year or something previously, but now that fund builds and we have that spilling over. So potentially some of this, as well as some of the vehicle replacement, are dollars that we, you know, when you look at this projection, it looks pretty gloomy and doomy there, but keep in mind that there are some dollars that by delaying and a different way to fund our apparatus replacement in the future, it begins to free up some dollars that will take care of some of that. So, and then moving along into the next year, all of this stuff is done in a similar fashion in that we have some plugs in here. So there's our reserve transfer. There's your MDCs. What did we do with the training piece in here?
We didn't do anything with it.
It's not in there.
Okay, so
We have the
it
20.
needs to go in there, so that's a pressure the other way.
We have the 20,000 in the line item above. Letter training.
Okay, and then, so one of the things that, right, wrong, or indifferent, you know, probably a number of years ago, probably too long to continue to do that, we were tracking the number of dollars that we were spending on training, and we were including the overtime as well as the tuition for those classes, and it was included in a line item, but we just don't, that's just not what we're doing and what we budget. So when you look at that, there are some overtime dollars that are included. If you looked at 2019, in that line item, it had $20,000 in there. And then if you look at, well, how much have we spent? It was only like $68 is what has been spent. And you might say, well, how come it's 20 and we've only spent 68? And we're not gonna spend 20. What has happened is that the overtime for the training got included with the overtime. So, and that's good news, because it frees up a couple of dollars that can be moved around. And again, going back and then changing our model and stuff, not good for us to do this mid-discussion while this is going on, because it'll just get way too confusing for everybody to follow. So, but what we've done is we've come across here and we put these things in. Melinda, now when something has been funded, she's crossed it out for the following year, so. So, and then moving along, this is the 2020, and then if you look at what the cash flow is, you know, we still have the cash flow of the 192. Typically in March is where we kind of see the low point, and then we see another, and this is when we get paid. So we get paid twice a year when people pay their taxes. So we see our revenue in April when people are making their tax payments. We see the money come in, as well as they're due in October on the 31st. So that's when we tend to see those dollars. The month prior, this is, you know, some people call this carryover. To me, carryover means something different. This is cash flow to me is what it means. But with those numbers plugged in, and again, that's 2020. So in moving across and taking a look at the 2021 budget, and again now in 2021, we've moved into a new levy cycle, and with the numbers that we have populated in there, when you begin to look at the cash flow, that's a negative number there. Maybe it should be in red, and then that's a positive number. So this means that in that year, that either you need some revenue so that it doesn't do that, or the effect is that you're going to end up dipping into your operational reserve, because somehow you got to come up with the money. And remember, this operational reserve, it's in the same account. So we don't have it sequestered into the same account. So if you dip into it, the effect is, well, it's just going to show on paper, it's going to be less until it recovers. And then moving over, and again, in the out years here, we'll have some additional thing. And remember now, we're still making the contributions to the equipment fund, and then the aid car purchase sits right here. So, and remember that, because when we look at the next year, if that's delayed another year or a period of time, then it really affects the cash flow.
Can you go to the revenue?
Sure.
21. So this is the same assumption that you showed previously.
Correct. So the M&O levy right now is 475,000, and then this shows in the new levy period that the amount would actually go up to 650,000.
And that's merely,
And
at
again,
this point,
we
merely
have
a
it under
placeholder.
maintenance and operation, but remember in the discussions that we've had before, this could be any combination of, the money could be increasing the levy rate and or the M&O levy. And again, we've talked about that, you know, and hopefully you understand that if you raise the levy rate, that's the only bad thing about doing that is, well, it caps at $1.50, so that's the most that it can ever get. And then that amount is prorated.
Lily's on the phone. Lily's on the phone.
Oh, she must have dropped off, huh? Are you still there? Okay, here we go.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Something happened on your end, or was it?
I have pretty bad coverage, so I guess I just dropped.
Okay, well, thanks for calling back, we appreciate that. So anyway, I lost my train of thought there, but this does include the 3 years at 3.
Okay. And you've taken that 650 and you've distributed it in a similar fashion to how the current levy would be collected in the correct place.
In the cap.
Yeah.
So again, this is purely an estimate, this is a placeholder right now, this is not anything that has been approved, but it's a starting point on what might be required.
Correct, and we're trying to show you, well, what are the things in it, what are the pressures, and we'll be able to draw. And then, you know, one thing to remind you about too is with our levy rate, we have a preliminary calculation of what this looks like. Remember in the past that, you know, in 1 year, we actually had a combination of the regular levy, the M&O levy, and the bond. I think it was $1.92, closer to $1.93. And then in the model year that we're looking at for this year, is $1.57. And then everybody got their tax statements, and we all know that those went up quite a bit. So the effect is, no, it doesn't increase your, you know, just because you got a statement that says that your taxes went up 17%, it doesn't mean that your taxes are going up. What actually happens is the taxes will go up at a lesser rate, unless you vote something in, then the levy rate actually goes down. So the combined levy rate, you know, our people have been exposed to $1.93 at the high side before. So, and then we have some calculations on what this would look like in each of the years that we did. But we probably structurally.
It was $1.93 on a lower AB.
Yes.
Right. It's
Correct.
the combination of the two. Just talking about rate is very.
And make no
very
mistake,
misleading.
that what they paid when they were doing the $1.93 was significantly less than what $1.93 would net in today's dollars.
Right. Maybe less than what they're paying at any other rate, $1.20. That rate doesn't tell you anything because both sides change.
And you're correct. So
Both sides change. You can't just compare a rate between years. It's difficult.
Okay, so, again, you know, I don't need to go too much further, but you know, on the cash flow side, I think you need to see this so that you can see, and then that will help us to get some direction for what happens in the future. So, negative, you know, so we have 3 months there of negative numbers, and then a couple in the back half of this year. Again, you make some changes in your capital, you know, the equipment replacement fund, and, you know, you're probably gonna have to shift some dollars over here, but we're not gonna be able to do what we had talked about and to make this look all that great. And then, so this is 2023, and again, what we were trying to do is to come up with some projections that would go out through the levy period. So again, you know, a couple of pretty big numbers that we're seeing there. And then this would be the last year of the new levy cycle. So again, the apparatus replacement, the good thing about that, the contribution to the apparatus replacement, if you look at, there's some sequestered dollars that we already have that we looked at of about 305. And then looking forward to your contributions that are shown in here of about 600K. So it takes care of some of this stuff, but the problem is in taking care of it, it sure doesn't take care of our apparatus needs in the future. So.
Right, effectively, that fund is no longer there.
potentially, and, you know, we're gonna have to make some decisions on moving forward on exactly what we're gonna do. But I wanted to share this with you so we can get you thinking about it. As we move through this next budget cycle, you know, we'll be focusing on, well, what does 2020 look like? We don't, you know, we know what the revenue's gonna be because we have the M&O levy. It's really the planning for that next budget cycle that is, you know, where we have to have this locked in and we have to have a sustainable plan moving forward.
Sure. Let's look at your summary. Sheet two. That's helpful.
So, I have a question, Chief. So you put $650,000 in there for the levy for 2021. Obviously, that is not enough money though, because we're running a deficit. What should that number be?
Well, I think we should go down and look at the other items that we've added so far. Maybe discuss those a little bit first before we try to speculate on what that, decide what we think should be included, or at least in our estimate before we look at the funding required for that. Does that make sense? Yeah. So let's go back down to your recommended items.
And then, so when you were looking at on the summary, then, is this what you're talking about that you wanted to see?
Yeah, I think, well, we just saw the 100,000.
Which was a 50K increase,
Right.
okay?
Um,
Then this changed, so this and this were previously shown as 120 apiece.
Mhm.
And in this forecast, it's shown 80 and 80. And then this is, I know it's gonna make this a little smaller, but it'll.
Yeah, maybe close the revenue too. Yeah, that's a good one.
So,
Thank you.
and trying to make this so that it looks a little bit bigger, so you can look at all the years. But 4 years at 120, that's 480 plus 160, all in the capital replacement for vehicles. But again, if you zero all this out, you say, well, we're gonna put these all at zero. What are you gonna do to buy a new A-card? What are you gonna do to buy a new internet? What are you gonna do to buy anything? So there has to be some kind of fund in there.
Right, the other side of it too is there are at least a couple of items, the training specifically, as well as the coverage for the training, which are not included at all.
That obviously, that should have been included here, and I guess that was a oversight on my part.
Well, I mean-
Make sure that we had this included, but, and we could, because if we're gonna start this, I mean, that's gonna be, you know.
It's gonna start there, sure. Yeah, if you scroll down just a little bit more. So there you've got the annual numbers. So with the recommended items, right now, and whether or not you include any contribution to vehicle replacement, we're gonna be, to do these items, we're gonna be spending more than we're taking in this year.
And if you look at this number and you look at this, and then you look at what our cash reserve is, that in excess of what the reserve amount is, that would reduce that down quite a bit. So at going into the new levy period, we're gonna, and you, that one-time money, you only get to spend that one time.
Right. Well, certainly, I think at least a few of these items we really need to do this year. For me, the overtime, and changing the schedules, is estimated to be essentially a $0 effect. And it has other benefits, so I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm still, well, I agree, and I'll support that. You know, our overtime went from, I don't know, 38,000, then 50,000, and now all of a sudden, this year we're at 100,000, so we had this huge jump, and it's this 100,000 projected out for the next 5 years.
When you have a change in your coverage and you're moving from using career firefighters to do something, it costs you more money. So, and it's gonna cost you more overtime too, because you're buying that block of hours that you're covering. And there's a ton of hours that we were using volunteers that were covering 12 hours every single day times 365 days. And now we're talking about covering that with career employees. There's a big cost to that. So part of what you're seeing is that cost is, and then, so the overtime number that she has plugged in here, so Melinda, do you put the?
5%.
Okay, so the overtime number for the out years then is higher than what it is this year, because it will be, and I think we saw that this year, that will, and when we did the budget last year, you know, I told you that, well, we may have some, depending on what happens with the overtime, that may see.
But that should be lower next year.
So-
In this scenario, because you have another employee.
You would think that that's the case,
But you don't-
however,
you
with
don't
the
think
new
so?
model, the delta is not 100%. So, and I know that's kinda hard to
Well,
understand.
yeah, I know it's not 100%, but if you added an additional firefighter, would your overtime still be at $100,000?
Yeah, and again, I think that it was low before, so if you look at, what it was, this year was like 3%, and then so move that up to 5, not at 19. The effect of that is way huger than percentage-wise now, by, you know, moving the overtime up to 100,000. But will we be able to get by? And again, you know, we can plug whatever number you like in there, so, but I think that we were looking at like 90,000 to get at 5%. And again, part of this is based on what we would expect with the coverage model that we're looking at. And some of the information comes from other departments, and some of it's from our own experience that we've seen in the past. I don't know.
So you think 5% is a realistic?
I think that it probably, but I'll tell you when it'll be low. You put somebody on disability and then have that coverage, you're not even gonna be close to it. And hence why we have, you know, quite a bit of cash that we have to temper that. So right now, we've been pretty lucky that right now we don't have anybody who's off on disability, and we've done pretty well. But you remember where we've been in the past, and remember, we were only catching half of the overtime, because we were doing the replacement during the day, so we had 3 people on during the day, and then in most cases, we had volunteers to provide that coverage at night, and still have that level of coverage.
So, not to get sidetracked here, but Chief Clark's briefing paper for his board,